Hello, we are back. This is part 3 of a 3-part series featuring Jill Orlov, JillOrlov.com. And this segment of the 3-part series, we are going to be talking about Jill's upcoming one-woman show at D. Thomas Fine Miniatures in the Gallery, which is starting on May 21st. With a Sunday, May 21st, with an open house from 3 to 5. So we encourage you guys, if you're local, please do join us for this very special event to kick off an exhibition of new works by Jill Orlov, who is a miniaturist working in metal sculpture. If you weren't able to click on the other 2 segments, we have a segment. The first segment really is a great chance to meet Jill and learn a little bit more of her background and experience in architecture and miniatures. And then in the second part of this 3-part series, we talk more about her miniature work as miniatures as objects of art. And in this segment, we're going to spend some time talking specifically about the show, which is called Those Were the Days, which features brand new work by Jill, which features iconic television studio sets in miniature from the 1970s. And so there are 3 main pieces in this show, and we're going to talk about those pieces now, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the inspiration and for the show and how we really how this really came about. So I think we really should just talk a little bit about how this show came about. I just want to tell you, from me personally, I fell in love with Jill's work when I discovered she did a piece for the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. I fell in love with her full-size furniture pieces, which incorporated miniatures into the full-size work. And I said, I've got to work with this woman. I just love what she does. So let's talk a little bit about how that came about and how what the inspiration was for this show, Those Were the Days, Jill.
Well, I think you helped navigate that whole theme, because I had the one piece that was relatively new, but it was existing, where I called it the Archie and Edith sitting room, where, based on All in the Family, a very loose take on that set. Because what I do is I take old drawers or old vintage wooden boxes and then build my steel vignettes into them. So I had found a vintage drawer that was actually more like from the 50s, maybe from the 70s, very little detail. And that had no hardware on it. And that drawer, then I turned it on its side and make it a diorama. But what I wanted to showcase was 2 different styles of chairs. So Archie's chair, his big, comfy, threadbare chair, and then her more elegant, delicate chair, but building them out of steel and making soft kind of cushions out of steel.
So how did that come about, literally? Like, when we talked a little bit about in the other segment, we talked a little bit about your process and how your discovery of what you want to build. How did this piece come about?
Well, probably just the whole that's 2 of these sets are part of the Smithsonian's collection at the American History Museum. And so their exhibit, rather than the whole studio set, is just their 2 chairs sitting there with a table. And I loved the 2 chairs sitting there side by side, the more feminine chair and the more kind of grouchy masculine chair. And I loved the looks, and I thought, I want to try to showcase my work and how I can build these 2 chairs and show them in a vignette. And then so what I went off course with, where that studio set has a stair behind it and a coat rack and the door off to the side. So I took a lot of liberties in this one, where behind the 2 chairs I have a big picture wall with a whole bunch of pictures, and that's more of a modern look.
Right. So you were inspired when you saw the Smithsonian exhibition. Is that really the biggest driver?
Well, I have to admit, I only saw it virtually. I haven't been to the exhibit.
Oh, you've got to see it.
That's horrible.
Well,
especially since my brother-in-law worked on it.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You were telling me about that. So were you impacted at all when you were growing up by All in the Family?
Just that, back then we all watched the same shows. There wasn't this, incredible amount of options. So many different friends watched so many different shows. And so back then we all watched kind of a lot of the same things, and we could all talk about them. And these were, just ingrained in our growing up.
Right.
So.
Right. We talked a little bit about in the previous segment about this emotional connection that we have to miniatures, and I think growing up, like you said, we all watch these shows, and and for me, so completely impactful watching these shows and the messages that they, especially something like All in the Family, the messages that came out of that and the learnings that came out of that, and for me, I love the whole idea about capturing that. All too famous studio set that is so familiar to us, capturing that in a miniature form, and then translating it, having that personal translation to it. I noticed that there are some other things in that vignette that we didn't see in the show. I think there's a fishbowl on the what is on that center?
I went a bit off course with this one.
I love the liberties that you took because it's so whimsical and so fun, and it sort of offsets the seriousness. Just like the two different chairs are different. You've got the fluffy chair, and then you've got this very elegant chair. Then you throw in these whimsical sort of, you took liberties. I love that.
I took a lot of liberties in this one. The front door is off to the right and on a different wall, but because I set up these rules for myself, I have to work within this box.
Right.
So I thought about what should the door be on the side, but it just didn't make sense. It wouldn't have looked right. So I, shifted it to the back of the box. So I often have one operable piece in my work. I think just to, I don't know if it's an attempt to try to show my new skills and so I made an operable door in that piece.
So that door works?
That door swings.
So this is really interesting. So for each one of your pieces, you attempt to have an operable element?
Sometimes, not always, but
in all three pieces.
Often these vignettes or these dioramas that you see of more classic, they're often closed off. And mine, not that you can play with them, they're not interactive or for children, but I think I like the interaction where, you can put your hand in and see the scale and open the door and or have two pieces side by side, and you open that door and you can see the next box, kind of like add a bead, but instead it would be add a room. So you'd have a living room next to a kitchen and maybe the bedroom beyond another room. So you could have a series of these boxes.
So that was also part of the intent.
That was all part of the plan.
I love it. See, I didn't know all this. This is fantastic. Okay, so the whole idea about sort of playing with the true, this is where the chair should be. This is where there should be a door. Everything in the studio set needs to be recreated in miniature. I think this gets into sort of the conversation that we were having in the previous, the second part of this series, where we talked about the difference between, a fabulous miniature and then a fabulous piece of art. And I think at the end of the day, it becomes about those choices that you make that enter the piece that really make you start to think, and that's the difference between a fabulous, perfectly scaled miniature and this vignette or diorama that really gets you thinking. Because you could easily just look at a photograph but you're not going to feel the same way, and you're not going to feel it all, I think, versus seeing this wonderful structure that's been handcrafted and hand put together to tell the story. So I don't know if I have a favorite piece yet of the three. I don't know if I have to even have a favorite piece, but they all speak to me. They all speak to me in some way. But the All in the Family piece is fabulous. And as you said, that was really the kickoff, that the impetus for the theme around the show, right? Which is those were the days, and
right.
So
and you said, what other pieces should I do? And I said, well, I've always been obsessed with the Brady Bunch stair. Mike Brady's open riser stairs. That's the iconic stair that everybody, I used to call them Brady Bunch stairs when you saw them in somebody's home or in a magazine.
Right. And that I think those stairs, they totally play into your strengths of working with metal, right? Because those stairs were very, mid-century, with a post-century modern? I don't know what the word is.
Yeah, I would kind of call that mid-century modern. He had that open floor plan that you always saw at the beginning of the show, and they have all kinds of mid-century modern art that I think is gone through a process of even getting appraised. I think they have some real art in their studio set.
Right. We talked a little bit about that and how you incorporated some of that art into the piece. Is that right?
Well, my take on it.
Right. Well,
the horse sculpture. It's a more kind of Asian horse plaster sculpture, and I used a found object for that piece.
I think the staircase is definitely one of my favorites. We love the dogs. We love that the dog is barking right now. Do they need to be fed? I love it. So, no, but the staircase is definitely one of my favorite parts of that. But also, there's that whole wall behind the stairs with the geometric shapes. Oh, did I lose you?
Nope, I'm still here. The stair with the geometric shapes.
Well, no, behind the stairs, there's that wonderful pattern.
On that wall, behind the stair were these bright colors that, until I started, delving into these studio sets, it's this bright orange, this bright turquoise, and bright yellow, kind of Mondrian type of pattern on the wall. And these heavy, big wooden columns. And so my take on that was to use copper mesh, because copper can change color. I wouldn't say easily. That's a challenge to plan for the color that copper is going to take on. But I was able to somewhat achieve somewhat of those three colors.
Right, so that's actually a really interesting solve, because you don't use a lot of color in your pieces because it's metal, right? So you're really working with metal and the colors of metal, right? Is that the way to say it?
Right, I mostly work with steel, and I've always liked that tone-on-tone look. So a lot of my pieces are kind of sort of monotone, and that's why I bring in some other pops of other metals for another pop of color or texture, or I bring in other miniaturist work that's done in glass. I don't do glass blowing. So some of those are kind of my opportunity to add in color.
So that's actually what you did in the Olna family piece. You had the fishbowl with the colorful fish, and the fishbowl is made of glass, right?
Right.
I love that. And so in the Brady Bunch piece, you have, what are the elements? You said you brought in the copper mesh.
So I have the copper mesh, which has 3 different colors. I somewhat achieved a blue and a sort of a yellow and sort of an orange. So I did not, stick with the traditional clean copper look. So those are some colors in that one. And then I also used some very aged steel, some old steel that has a lot of, it's a lot of texture to it because it's been sitting out in the elements for years. So that has sort of a rust color. So the Brady Bunch piece probably has a lot of color in it. But it is, and a lot of textural changes.
But it is overall a monotone piece, though, right? So then it's not bright colors. There's color.
No, they're all muted colors.
Yeah. I love it. All right, so this actually gets into the whole idea of reimagined, because the show is about, those were the days, and we're really looking back on these iconic studio sets, and we're bringing you're reimagining them in miniature form. So I see a lot of within that reimagine, you're not only working in different materials, and you're clearly working in whimsical elements, but you're also reimagining in terms of color and texture, and I think that's what's so interesting about the show, is not only are you bringing in these iconic television studio sets, which are so familiar to us, but you're reworking them in the miniature form, which is really making you think and really making you super focus in on that piece and that studio set and bringing you back to a time. I think for at least for me, was a special time. You know, I was growing up in the 70s. That was a great, and those shows were so iconic and so meaningful, and so many ways, you know, helped to, you know, teach, you know, what's right. So
right.
Thank you for that.
And people still quote them, and they're recognizable, instantly recognizable.
Exactly, they're instantly recognizable. And then there's the third piece, which is probably familiar to most, I think, because it touches upon a subject that is probably most familiar to us, which is food. So tell us about the third piece that you did for this show.
The third piece, where was that inspiration from? I mean, she has been so important to everybody's, anybody interested in cooking. Everybody's read her, or probably a lot of people have read her book on the art of French cooking. So I decided to do Julia Child's Kitchen, which is also at the Smithsonian in D.C., the American History Museum. Mm-hmm. So that entire kitchen, her Cambridge kitchen, was recreated there.
I don't remember seeing that in there. Okay, it's there though. I believe you.
I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's at the American History Museum.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's... okay, yeah. So go.
So, trying to figure out what box would I use, because I have a collection of old boxes and drawers to start with my diorama, and that's the first step. And so in those I don't typically try to touch too much. I don't change their size, and I try to keep their patina, and then I put in the new steel pieces in that, and it's just this play on the old materials and the new materials. And so I didn't know what piece to use, and eventually I thought one of my studio mate that I share a welding studio with brought in this pale green chipped up paint old kind of toolbox, and I saw that and I measured it, and to the scale that I use, which is 1 inch to 1 foot, it was 1 inch off. Wow. So if Julia Child's kitchen was 20 feet long, this kitchen was 19 inches long. Wow. The box. Wow. So it was meant to be. And so I made a trade with her for another box I had, and that's where it all started.
I love it. So how long does it take you to make a piece? When you, I mean,
I used to keep track of the hours, and sometimes some of my earlier pieces might have taken 40 to 60 hours, but this Julia Child's Kitchen piece is probably my most detailed, most involved piece. It could be 100 hours.
Wow.
I stopped keeping track.
And just in terms of like, how do you measure the number of pieces or weight? Like, what are some statistics? So how much do these how much do these pieces weigh? How many individual pieces make them up? I'm always interested in sort of those statistics.
So, one person can carry each of these boxes. I can carry each of these boxes. They are heavy. The Brady Bunch piece and the Archie and Edith All in the Family piece are made they can hang on the wall. But the Julia Child Kitchen, because I wanted to get so much of her built-in cabinetry, and the table is a big part of that set, it's a deeper box, so that would not go on the wall. And so I scour the internet for all the photos, all the different views of her wall oven direction, or her famous Garland stove, and the cabinets. So what made so much sense that my studio mate had this green box is Julia's cabinetry was green and blue. This pale green and this pale blue, which I think a lot of people had a problem with when she was first designing it, but she stuck to her guns, and that's what she wanted.
Why did they have a problem
that was part of the iconic set.
Why did they have a problem with it?
I think those are very unusual colors for a kitchen, like pale green and pale blue.
Wow. But they were very colonial, very traditional colors.
That's true.
Yeah.
But her cabinet were two different colors.
Oh, so that was it. It wasn't consistent. People like it all to be one color, I guess. So the Julia Child's Kitchen is not meant to hang. Is it pretty heavy? You're saying it's heavy.
It's pretty heavy, but I can carry it.
Right. So,
it's only about 19 inches long.
Right. And are all of the elements that go into this kitchen individual pieces that you make before you put them together into the vignette?
Yes. So for months, I had a separate wall oven piece and the garland stove with the hood, and then the base cabinet and the wall cabinet and the refrigerator and the separate kitchen table, and then all of the pot rack walls. Wow. And so then I typically often have a steel floor, and everything is then attached once I'm ready to weld them onto the floor and slide them into the box. It's all part of this puzzle that takes me forever to try to figure out what order everything has to go in to make sure I can still maneuver it before it's locked into place.
So everything is locked into place and everything is welded together in some way, or welded to the floor.
Correct.
Wow. And in the Julia Child's kitchen, were there any elements that were outside the scope of material? Like, did you use glass or any other materials that aren't metal?
Well, there, of course, has to be a wine bottle. And so there is a glass wine bottle. I don't do the glass blowing, so I had to buy any of the glasswork I buy. So there's she had I just noticed this. She had a piece on top of her refrigerator that looked like a chicken in a bowl, probably a ceramic piece. Okay. And so I happened to have a little bird in a nest that looked like that. So sometimes I have little elements that I've collected over the years, or they might even be from the dollhouse that I had as a child. Right. So that might be pewter. Or I have books in there, because she had a small bookcase next to her refrigerator, and I make all those handmade books out of papers or vinyl wall coverings. And so all those are paper books, and they add a lot of color.
Right.
And then there's the tablecloth, which I make out of copper mesh.
Oh, wow.
And I made a little knife block with a wooden block.
Right. Fantastic. So, all right. So we are so excited for the show that's coming up. And like, again, I as I mentioned, if you're local folks, please do come by on Sunday the 21st, 3 to 5 here at the shop in Hastings-on-Hudson, which is just north of New York City in one of the wonderful river towns. We're just so fortunate to be so close to New York City, but out in the suburbs, so it's very country-like. So do come and visit, come and meet Jill, come and see the show. If there's one thing you want, Jill, folks who do get to make it to the show and see your work, that you want them to leave with in terms of how they think or feel, what is it that you sort of want to touch upon and encourage people to think or feel when they see your work? What is it that you want them to leave with?
Well, I hope that they see the love that I have for making these pieces. I wake up in the morning so excited to come up with how to make a certain piece and put the different elements together. And we were talking earlier about it's different than gluing two pieces of wood together. So just hiding the weld or making it look like the real piece that it is, but in miniature and out of steel, and the amount of work that goes into it. Yeah. And I hope people appreciate the love of these miniatures that I have.
Yeah. Well, I think that they will see that when they see it. So thank you so much for all the time in preparing for this show and for these individual interviews. This is great. I think people are going to love it and love to learn about you and your work. And I can't wait for this show. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. And thank you all for listening. So do come by and visit. And thank you for listening to this D. Thomas Fine Miniatures interview. All right. Take care, guys. And thank you, Jill.